most times when I talk, I'm talking to a group somewhat like this, where you're coming from the heart. You're doing you're doing your part to save the planet and help do that, and that's great. So, what do you care about? You care about saving the planet. You care about energy efficiency. You care about profitable work. All of this stuff that's on that list is important. The thing that I care about probably most deeply is making sure that people have a reasonable place to live at a reasonable cost. An old friend of mine once said to me, you can't call it affordable housing if they can't afford the utilities. And that's a point of view that an awful lot of people don't seem to pick up on, but I think it's one of the most important. So multifamily housing and affordable housing are not exactly the same, but they might as well be. That's pretty darn close. Almost a third of Californians live in multifamily housing, depending upon where you are in the state. In some cases, it's up to 70% of the households live in multifamily. That's 4.5 million people out of the 13.5 million people in the state. And over half of the new construction in California, the residential new construction, is multifamily. And has been that way for 7 years. In the past, it used to be that multifamily was about 1/4 of the volume of single family. It's now greater than single family, and partly it's because, although we're getting more people, as far as I know, we're not getting more land in California. So land's getting more expensive, and people don't want to live where they can't afford to live. The next slide, I'm not going to read to you. All of this is, you have it on your computers now. You can look at some of this. Some of the things that are in here, I'm not covering. It's just so you can look at it later. But what it comes down to is that when we're looking at affordable housing, we're looking at multifamily housing mostly. The people in multifamily even pay higher rates. We know that per square foot, the costs are higher than multifamily. Per person and per dwelling, it's less. Most people don't realize rates are higher too, and it's not like here's the rate if you're in single family, here's the rate when you're in multifamily. It's like here's the rate in this area, and this area is mostly multifamily. So in our urban areas, the rates are higher than in the more suburban areas. That's true for gas and electricity.
Really?
Yeah. Edison charges more than Reading does. So. In the energy cost increases in the previous decade, the cost of shelter didn't go up much faster than the consumer price index, and fuels and utilities did. In the more recent era, the cost of utilities has gone up about the same as energy in the last 10 years or so. But before that, it was going up much faster than the consumer price index. All right, now we're getting to the meat of what I want to get at. So the next one is average household income in California. And what you'll see is that we're really not any better off than we were 15 years ago. Things got worse, gotten better, but they haven't gotten better to a point where it's above that. But this is an average, and the average hides what's actually going on. For those of you that heard me speak before, I apologize for repeating myself. For those that haven't, I'm an economist. I've got a friend who's an economist from the Chicago School, and I've got a friend who's a Marxist, right? We went out hunting, and my Marxist friend saw this 8-point deer and took aim and shot, and of course he missed to the left. My friend from the Chicago School, the deer didn't move. My friend from the Chicago School took aim, and he shot, and of course he missed to the right. I thought, and it's still, the stag still didn't move. So I took aim. I was about to shoot, and I thought, well, on average, we got him. So that's how good averages are. They're good for some things, but don't try to apply it to everything. So the next slide shows you something called the Gini index, which is a measure of income inequality. And a Gini index of 0 means that everybody in the society makes exactly the same amount. A Gini index of 1 would mean that one person makes all the money and everybody else makes nothing. So what you really want is a lower Gini index if possible. The global average for countries is, I think, around 0.38. The United States is about 0.48. In other words, we're worse off than most places. And it's been getting worse. You hear about income inequality. Here's an actual measure of the income inequality, and you can see graphically that it's been getting worse.
What does that number mean?
What does it mean?
Yeah.
There's no metric at the end. It's not like cups, feet, dollars, anything. It's just between 0 and 1, and if you're at 0, you have perfect income equality across the society, and if you're at 1, you have perfectly unequal. So at one guy is making all the money, and nobody else in society is making anything.
So it may be unitless, but
unitless. Thank
it
you.
Must be based on something, right?
Income.
So is it a ratio of, say, median to average?
Good question. I know how to use it. I don't know the exact derivation of it. It was invented by a guy named Gini about 40 years ago.
Italian guy.
Yeah. But what you want is something that's really a low number, because that means it's we're all making pretty much close to the same thing. It's been getting worse. It's not good, and it's been getting worse. So here's the distribution of household income. And what I want you to try and remember here first is those numbers at the different percentiles. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see again how much change there's been over time for people in different income groups. And the highest group, obviously, they've been making more and more and more, and they have a higher part. The people who have done the worst in terms of maintaining their level of income are the ones at the bottom of the scale. So it really has been getting worse for the people who are in the worst shape, and better for the people who are in the best shape. So, yeah.
This would seem to show that it's getting worse for most people. Everyone except the top orange lines.
Bingo. Bingo. And actually, if you took it down to the 1% of the 1%, that's almost a straight line at a 45-degree angle. The closer you are to being the richest person in the United States, the better your position has been getting over time. The closer you are to the poorest person in the United States, the faster your position has been getting worse over time. I told you this was going to depress you, folks. I know that most of you care about affordable housing. A lot of you are in the affordable housing community. I'm trying to make sure that we all understand this is a critical issue. We can't save the planet and leave part of us behind. That's not saving the planet. That's not how it's done. We need to bring everybody along. We need to improve the position for the people who are in the worst shape, because it's getting worse for them. So,
do you have a sense of when this type of trend happened in our history before? I'm wondering if prior to in the Great Depression or in other parts where the rich were just getting rich and economic.
Okay, I don't know anybody's politics here, and I hope I don't I don't step on anybody, but quite honestly, under every Democratic governor or presidential administration, it has not gotten worse as fast as it has under every Republican. Every time our taxes are higher, everybody does better. I mean, it's exactly the opposite of what the Republican mantra is of we're going to make everybody better off by lowering the taxes. When we have had the fastest growth and the least inequality in the United States has been when our taxes, on average, are higher. Back in the 50s, when we had that monumental growth, we had, if you made over a certain amount, 90% of what you made went to taxes. And at that point, we built an incredible infrastructure that made industry and commerce work better. The higher our taxes are, the better off we are. And I know that's anathema to at least half the people in the country, but that's the fact if you go back and look at it. So 15% of all Americans live in poverty. 45% or 45 million people in America in poverty. And think about that. Where the feds set the poverty level is just not sustainable. You can't support a household on that level. And yet 47 million people in the United States are in that. And in 2000, it was only 34 million. Now, our population has grown, but not at that same percentage rate.
They're not quite the same.
No, I'm not. That's what you think. So over 1 out of every 3 people in poverty is a child.
Nehemiah, my memory of income inequality, starting with World War II, income inequality shrank a lot, and so the most equal in recent history was around 1973, and it's been getting worse and worse since 1973, about 45 years.
Yeah, but not so bad between 73 and 80. It was really only when Reagan became president that things started really actually going the other direction. Because of the idea of, oh, we'll just make the rich richer and then the wealth will trickle down.
Right?
It did not. So how do we define poverty? Think about this for a moment. If you have a family of 4 with 2 children, $24,000 a year is the poverty level. So you made $25,000 a year and you're raising 2 children. You're supposedly not in poverty. I challenge you to try that. All right, so renter households pay more for their income, and when this is talking about housing, it's not just the cost of rent or the mortgage; it's also the cost of utilities. And what you see is that owners actually, since about 2008, owners' positions have actually been getting better. Fewer of them are paying more than half of their income for housing, whereas renters, just the opposite. And one of the reasons that we have this tremendous boom in housing prices in California now is because these investors are buying up with cash, buying up the houses that other people can't afford, and that raises the cost. And guess what? They're renting them out, and it's hurting the people in rental. All right, the next one I'm going to skip over. You can take a look at that later. Except for please do take a look at that quote down at the bottom. Beatrice Webb was an English economist, probably the first person to recognize the policy implications of increasing poverty. Cost burden households. Cost burden means that you're spending more than 30% of your income. Severely cost burden means you're spending more than 50% of your income. And there are many more cost burden renter households than there are owner households, even though there's 3 owner households for every 1 renter household in the United States. Housing burden by income level, the worst situations are for the people who can afford it the least. And when we think about having care rates and other things to help out people in that situation, that really only helps on average. And you remember the deer, right? The average cost that people pay is not that relevant. What's relevant is when there's a spike, when we have a tremendous heat wave, or when utility rates change and go up. That's what hurts in low-income households, because they're typically pretty close to the tipping point, and anything that throws them over at that point makes it really hard for them. It's typically not the average amount they're paying, it's when they have a big chink. So in 2001, over 3.5 million multifamily households heated their homes to 65 degrees or less. Part of the reason this is important is when we do energy efficiency improvements to affordable housing, and then we want to verify that we actually did something, and we go, well, wait a minute, their utility use didn't go down. Well, if they're heating their house or their apartment to 60 degrees in the wintertime, because that's all they can frickin' afford, and then we fix their place, and now they can heat it to, say, 67, that's not a bad thing, folks. That doesn't mean the program failed. It means the result we got was not the KWH savings that the PUC wanted. What it means is we made society incrementally more equal at that point. These people can now have their homes heated to a reasonable temperature.
Which then also ties to asthma and cold issues.
Don't steal my thunder here.
I thought your time was done.
He thought my time was done.
You're 2/3.
So what do they do when they can't afford the utilities some month? To me, this is an untenable trade-off. When you take a look at the blue versus the yellow, if you don't have a housing burden, the blue ones show you how much people spend on various items. If you have a housing burden, here's how much they spend. So if they can't make the utility bill, where are they cutting back? They're cutting back on health care for their kids. They're cutting back on food. They're cutting back on clothing. They're cutting back on all these things that make life tolerable. Rental assistance. So how well is that working out? So out of every 4 households that qualify for rental assistance, there's nothing there for 3 out of those households. We don't have enough. That's today. We don't have enough for 3/4 of the households that need it. So I want to put this in perspective for you, and I don't expect you to read all of the details on this next slide, which is slide 25. You look at this later on, but the essence of this is that we spend in the United States over $350 billion a year on oil, on one commodity. How much do we spend on fixing the energy efficiency position in affordable housing? $10 billion a year. And that's what all of the states, plus all of the cities, plus all the counties, plus all the utilities, plus the federal government together spends. $10 billion a year compared with spending $360 billion a year on oil. The next slide shows you graphically what that looks like. So if you think we have our priorities straight, folks, let's look at it a little differently. And HUD spends $8 billion a year subsidizing, not fixing, subsidizing utility bills for folks. But that's about to change because we have a president who says it doesn't make that much difference. So in the president's budget, he would cut $6 billion from affordable housing programs. He would completely eliminate LIWIP, low-income weatherization program. He would cut welfare programs by over $100 billion, eliminate federal payments to the housing trust, and go the wrong direction on many other counts. So not only are we trying to make things better for the people who need it the most, the current administration is looking at making it worse so that those people in the top 1% can make more money. So what's the cost of not fixing these problems, of not doing the right thing? Well, we have 47 people per year who die from carbon monoxide poisoning in California. That's just in California. We have 55,000 ER visits for asthma among children. We have 18,000 visits for asthma from 65 and older. And I joined that group not too long ago. I don't have asthma, but I do have respiratory issues. An average of 68 people a year just in California, not the United States, die from heat events. 203 people just in 2006. The societal cost of missed work and missed school is astronomical. It's just that it's a lot more than what we spend on energy efficiency. Green renovation impact. So there's a study done in, I think this is Minnesota, on when you go through and do this green retrofit, a lot of which is energy efficiency, but not all of it. I was amazed on the second set of columns on the left-hand side. I was amazed at the difference in childhood asthma issues. There was no difference there. But when you go to non-asthma respiratory issues, both for children and adults, it was an extreme difference. USGBC did another evaluation where they fixed some places and then went and took a look at what the issues were before and after. And I pointed out a couple things here. So in the past 3 months, how many times did you visit an emergency room or urgent care center because of asthma? And before they did this work, it was almost 1 visit per year on average, versus afterwards it was 0 visits per year on average in that 3 months, not a year. Same thing for missed days, 1.55 versus 0. So doing this stuff, fixing people's homes, has a significant economic impact for everybody. The next slide. Stress causes a lot of these problems, and stress is obviously much worse when you are in a situation where you can't afford your housing and can't afford your bills. You want to take a look at the next one. These are snapshots from 2004, 2013 of poverty in California. The darker blue is worse, and you can see we've been going the wrong direction, even in California. The next one is just kind of, I'm not going to go over that one, but if you want to take a look at the Social Vulnerability Index page, I've put this on there. I think it's very interesting to look at. This mostly has to do with vulnerability to climate change, but it actually goes much broader than that. It's being used for other analysis. The last set of slides I have is on what's the value of making these changes. So I did an analysis a number of years ago on using information from the California Department of Finance, what happens to a dollar that you spend on different things. And the average market basket of goods that people in affordable housing are going to be buying locally, like haircuts and groceries and daycare and et cetera, 75 cents of that dollar gets respent in the neighborhood. Only 25 cents of that dollar leaks out of the local community into elsewhere. But you spend $1 on energy, only 28 cents stays there. 72 cents out of that dollar leaks out of the neighborhood, exits the neighborhood. It's
Goes
not
to a big rich city.
to shareholders elsewhere. So if you take a look at what that, what happens over time, that 75 cents of that first dollar gets respent, and then part of that, 3/4 of that stays, etc. I looked at when on the energy, I assumed after that first spend, we're back to that 75% stays in the local neighborhood. So by the time you get down to where it's less than a penny that you're looking at, that non-energy dollar is worth $4 in local economic activity, whereas the dollar spent on energy is worth $2.12. So, what that comes down to is $25,000 invested in energy efficiency for multifamily tenants will save those tenants $5,000 to $25,000 a year in energy costs. That's a 1 to 5 payback. Apply the multiplier effect, that's an additional $9,000 to $47,000 of economic activity in a local community. At the time that we had redevelopment communities in California, that's when I did this, they thought that it was a really good thing if you could get, 50 cents of economic activity for spending $1, because the next year you get another 50 cents, and by 2 years, this means that this is better than any of the redevelopment expenditures that any of the redevelopment agencies in California did ever.
And they were famously corrupt and wasteful and lost money on investments, even though the affordable housing component of 10%, if they spent it, was awesome.
Yeah.
The other 90% / 100% that they spent never got that kind of return.
But even if, this gets a higher return to the community than anything that they considered doing. All right, and I was asked to leave you, even though it's a depressing thing, to leave you with a smile. So there's my smile.